Good morning. Good morning. Good to see you. Just some inside jokes. Hey, if you have been following along, we're in the Gospel of Mark, and the reason we teach through books of the Bible is because we really think the Bible is important. We talk about, in church and Christianity sometimes, the Bible's important, the Bible, but we never actually read it. We never actually spend time in it, and so just our conviction as a church is that we're to teach through the scriptures, and we jumped into the book of Mark. And those of you who are newer may not realize that I really have this affinity for the gospel according to Luke. And so it's been interesting for me to jump into Mark, and I've learned to appreciate his brevity. Each of the authors has their own way of kind of telling the stories. Same stories, just they tell it from a different angle. It'd be like if four of us were hanging out and we witnessed something, we would all tell truthful stories, but we would kind of tell different details would interest us, and they're all kind of interesting. But I like Mark just for his brevity. And so I've been telling you, if you're the kind of person who likes to know what we're preaching on, you can read ahead. Not going to work next week. So I'm just giving you a little heads up. We're going to go a little out of chronological order next week. As we think about Easter and we think about what that means, and so we're going to jump ahead a little bit, but don't worry, we'll come back to it. So if you're following along, we're in Mark chapter 3, and you can follow along. And if you have one of these are Bibles. They're and actually, if you don't have one, we have some in the back. You're welcome to take home with you with some reading plans and different things in there. But we also are on YouVersion. If you're a YouVersion person, if you search for live events. Everything's on there too. If you can't see the screens, I'm a little bit older now, so if I don't have my contacts in, I may not be able to see it from the back. We're not going to call you out. Anyway, so Mark chapter 3, we're going to talk about Jesus. So, starting in verse 7, it says, Jesus went out to the lake with his disciples, and a large crowd followed him. And you can kind of picture this. There's all these people that they call disciples that are following him. He's been calling people to follow him. And a large crowd followed him because, anyone want to guess? It was like a murmur. It's like no one really wanted to commit to the answer there. But he's healing people. Was it?
They're lemurs.
Were they neighbors?
Lemurs.
They're lemurs? They're lemurs. Lemmings. Lemurs? I don't know. Anyway, Jesus is out. He's out there with his disciples, and a large crowd is following him. Vast numbers of people, because he was doing some cool stuff. He's healing, and as we've been going through the gospel, we look at he's like driving out demons. He's healing people. He's starting to have these conflicts with the religious people of the day. So if you have conflicts with religious people, you're just like Jesus. It's okay. And so all these people are from, and you kind of picture. I try to picture the crowds. I picture Firefly. Because, if you live in Dover, there's this small music festival called Firefly. Yeah. I was getting some supplies because we do some stuff. We clean up for the homeless at that, where we go out and we collect sleeping bags and everything. And, John and I kind of organize that. And it's a lot of fun. But you don't realize the scale of it, if you're not a Fireflyer. I remember our first year we went out, we just kind of got permission to go out. And we picked up some stuff because we heard there was some stuff out there. And we picked up 2 giant truckloads full. And we thought, man, we covered pretty much most of this festival. We turned the corner and realized we'd only been on one little tiny piece of the whole thing. And so if you're not a festival person, it's kind of hard to imagine, but everyone's just kind of pushing in there. And if you have personal space issues, like most Americans, we like 10 feet of personal space, probably the music festival's not for you. It's interesting because if you ever travel internationally, different countries have different levels of personal space that they require. And let's just say there's some countries where there's no personal space. I'm like, man, I don't even know you. Why are your feet on my lap during the flight? Just trust me. Anyway, or maybe if you're not a Firefly person, NASCAR. Remember back in the day, especially before, before kind of the economic thing. I mean, there's tons of people there. And if you live in Dover and it's NASCAR time, if it's Firefly time, what do? You stay out of North Dover for a certain period of time. I can time, the race is about to start, go. And then I'll run up and do everything I need to do in North Dover and then get out before the race ends. And it's kind of like that. Yeah, and there's actually traffic cams now. I will watch the traffic cams from DelDOT to figure out if it's a good time to anyone. I remember one time I used to take kids paintballing after church, and go shoot your friends with a bunch of balls of paint. But it was fun. And we would run after church. We would run out between. We had a night service, and so we'd run out and we'd go paintballing between the services. I remember one time this kid's like, his dad's like, I'm not going to be able to get a ride home. So he talked me into it. And I was like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. I didn't realize he lived right up in North Dover by the races. So I'm racing to drop him off, and I could see the traffic start to leave Dover Downs, and I'm running on all the back streets trying to keep ahead of it because I wanted to make it to church, and I still needed a shower after paintballing. Anyway, that has nothing to do with it. But if you've ever been to a big concert, you kind of picture that. There was the legendary band Milli Vanilli. I worked for them for one concert, and my job was to keep people off the stage, because we had barriers and all kinds of things, and they still had to have a bunch of us physically keeping people, because everybody wanted to get up to see Milli Vanilli because they were such a fantastic band. I knew they were lip syncing. I didn't know they did the whole album, but they were running around doing all kinds of acrobatics and singing perfectly, and then they stopped and they're like, "It's so good to be here." I'm like, man, it's that kind of thing. People are pressing in because they want to see Jesus, and so they came far from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, from the east of the Jordan River, even as far as north as from Tyre and Sidon, because the news about his miracles spread far and wide, and vast numbers of people came to see him. Now, honestly, if you're honest with me, as soon as I started reading those names of cities, who zoned out? Because you're like, I have no idea where Tyre and Sidon are, and if you have a Bible, one of these things, there's these cool things in the back called maps, and you can look it up, or you can just Google it. But a lot of times when we hit geography of another country, we're like, I don't know, that's it's somewhere. but if you look at it, it's about 50 miles away to go from Capernaum to Sidon. So. That would be like walking to Wilmington to hear some guy and to see some things he's doing. Who wants to walk to Wilmington? Nobody. Well, one, you don't want to go to Wilmington, but you wouldn't. It's a long walk. You're not talking an easy jaunt. I don't know if I want to walk to Magnolia from here. We're a car culture. It's hard to walk places, and so they come from all these different places, and it says. Jesus instructed his disciples to have a boat ready so the crowd would not crush him. And this is like escape lane. You can picture politicians, they need to have their car, or rock stars, they kind of have to get them on the bus when things get kind of crazy. I have to admit, you're going to think I'm nuts after this, but I always have an escape lane. Even if I'm in the drive-thru, in case someone jumps out with a machete, I have a way to get out. I always leave enough distance. It could happen. It's probably not likely, but it's just, I don't know. I'm always having an escape plan, that kind of thing. So this is Jesus' escape plan. He's like, if it gets too much, if they push, we got this boat to jump in. It's not that he doesn't want to hang out with people, but he's human. It's like. I think sometimes we forget that because there is this, and we've been talking about it in the Gospel of Mark, you really see, Jesus said he was God. Sometimes we miss it because of some cultural things that we miss out on. So we've been kind of hitting some of those things. So Jesus is God, but here's the thing. He's human too. He's not Superman. When they went to drive the nails into him, spoiler alert for Good Friday, the nails didn't bend. They went through him. He's flesh and blood. He's a normal person. And so he's making these plans because he didn't want to get crushed in that way for our iniquities. Little Bible joke there. Some of you got that. Some of you didn't because it wasn't that funny anyway. So all this stuff's going. They're pushing forward, and it says, and whenever those possessed by evil spirits caught sight of him, the spirits would throw them to the ground in front of him, shrieking, "You are the Son of God!" But Jesus sternly commanded the spirits not to reveal who he was. And so it's like this. All these people are yelling. The spirits are going, "You are the Son of God." Jesus is saying, hey, be quiet. And it's because, there's this constant pattern, that Jesus wasn't really ready. I mean, it's very clear from the Gospel of Mark that Jesus is God. That's not, like beginning, first line. I mean, they're telling you this is the good news about Jesus, the Son of God. But it's, Jesus wasn't looking to set up a medical clinic to heal a bunch of people. He was often, he was taken off in the morning because everyone showed up the next day. They're like, hey, we're all looking for you because, you healed a bunch of people and we like that. And Jesus is like, hey, I've come to preach. I got other places to go. Jesus wasn't looking to start a revolution against Rome. He wasn't like, because a lot of people had these, expectations. And expectations are funny things because, if you go to any event and you have like expectations of it, and it doesn't go your way, you're usually pretty disappointed, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're expecting, we go to this party, it's going to be great. You get there, there's 4 people, and it's like the most boring thing you've ever been to. Expectations not met. It could be great, 4 people there, but it wasn't what you were expecting. Some of you are going, this church isn't what I expected this morning. No. We're not going to meet your expectation. And so there's these, because he wasn't the Messiah, this is not the Messiah you're looking for. He wasn't what some people were looking for in the Messiah. They were looking for this guy who would come and kind of kick the Romans out and take over, and so they were kind of waiting for that. And so Jesus wasn't there. He was kind of, hey, don't let people know don't reveal who I am, because they have these wrong expectations of who I am. And so Jesus isn't fully ready to reveal who he is. They needed time to teach so they could fully understand. They needed time to live with his disciples so they could better understand who God is. It's a lot like kids. When your kids are little, like I remember Josh was born, and it's like, I spent a lot of time investing in Josh, and, love the boy. But like when he was born, I didn't like explain everything about life to him right away. Right? Because you can't retain it. It takes time. And so Jesus is with his disciples. He's spending time with them. He's there to teach them. And it's not time yet for the graduation. It's not time yet for them to be who they are. It's kind of like I've been coaching middle school wrestling, which is really interesting. I've always coached high school wrestling, and I had worked with a college when we lived in Maine. And, there's different expectations of what people can do wrestling-wise. And I found out in middle school, because it's been a long time since I've done middle school wrestling, it's a whole nother set of expectations. My expectation is learn how to stand properly. Things that, generally people knew by the time they got to me before that. And so it's been interesting. I can't show them everything I know yet, because they have to grow and be ready. I can't even show, like, the wrestlers everything I want to teach them in a year, because they're not ready. I remember I showed this one kid this. I'm a rather physical wrestler. And so I got this move where if a guy's resisting a half, I'll put it in the pocket. He wasn't ready for it earlier in the season. He showed it to him, he didn't understand it. Later on, I showed him, now I get it. And it's fun because you get to pin people. There's lots of wrestling and sports analogies in my sermons, I figured. Anyway, it's that kind of thing. So Jesus is preparing his disciples. And it's not time yet to listen. That's why he's telling the demons, like, hey, be quiet. And it says, and afterward, Jesus went up on a mountain, called out the ones he wanted to go with him, and they came with him. They called out the ones he wanted with him. I think one of the most awkward times in life is middle school. Sorry for those of you who are in that. It will get better, I promise. It almost can't get worse, right? But, it's awkward because you're kind of going from being a kid, and you hit, puberty, and you're starting to become a teenager, but you're still like kind of half a kid. And it's kind of awkward because you start, whereas you're younger, you had friends and everything, but your peer group, your friends, becomes really super important. And it's really awkward. And I remember like the most awkward first day of school, and I've told you this before, what's the most awkward thing on first day of school? Introducing yourself? Oh yeah, they make you stand up. That's why one of the reasons we don't do that here. I was at a church one time, they ask who the guests are, and then they like make you stand up and talk. Oh my gosh, I wish I hadn't raised my hand. You don't know because you're the guest. And now you're like, I'm Jeff. I live in a hotel over here. Long story, I was living in a hotel in Pittsburgh for a while before. Anyway, it was a pretty seedy, crazy motel. We got some stories from that one too. You've met my friends Pat and G. We got some crazy stories. Not that we did, it's just like when you're, anyway, long story. But I remember I walked to this church from there and it was like, stand up and tell us all about yourself. We're not doing that. But anyway, I think one of the most awkward things in middle school is lunch. Because now you have to decide where you're going to sit. And unless if you're first in, you can just sit at an empty table, you're good. But it's like you get your lunch and there's people sitting everywhere and then you're kind of hovering going, where do I sit? Like, where do I go? And it's sort of awkward. And the first couple days, it's like you see people starting to shift and go. And then sometimes you sit at a table and no one there likes you, and then it's awkward because they don't talk to you. And it's this kind of thing. And so, Jesus, kind of, when you're in that moment, if someone calls out to you and says, hey, sit with us, how does it feel? Yes. And that's kind of what Jesus is doing. He's calling out certain disciples and he's going, hey, come sit with me. And I think the scale of this is more like, we were talking, about, some of us, I used to run some punk shows and stuff, and we were talking about those on Saturday. No, not shows of people who were punks. Anyway, which is funny. I'm the most non-musical person ever. I always find myself running like open mics and music shows. And anyway, but it would be like if you're at a big concert and the lead singer of something goes, hey, Will, come here. It's like, you'd be like suddenly like, oh, wow. So all these people are following Jesus. All these people are kind of hanging on to every word he says. And he calls out these people to be up front. I picture how they must feel. They must feel pretty good, right? Would you feel good? I mean, Jesus shows you. And he says, then he appointed 12 of them, and he called them his apostles. They were to accompany him. He would send them out to preach, giving them authority to cast out demons. These are the 12 he chose. Simon, whom he named Peter. And this is where it gets confusing. Disciples sometimes have two different names. It's not like today where we had to get a legal form and change your, okay, well, if you there's like that, what is it? It's still in the Duncan Center. You have to change your name and stuff. And I remember getting married, and you have to go show them your thing, and it's like a formal process. And then you have to post in the paper now. I see those all the time. I'm that boring guy sometimes who reads the back of the Dover Post that has all those public notice things, and you have to change your name. In those days, someone could just call you something different, and that's your name. That's your name now. You're Snooky or whatever. But and then it was to the point where then that might even be what's on your gravestone. So anyway, it gets a little confusing sometimes with the disciples because they get nicknames. Simon, whom he named Peter, James and John, sons of Zebedee. But Jesus nicknamed them the sons of thunder. Another good way to maybe translate that would the sons of commotion or sons of agitation. I love these guys. We've talked about them before. It's like they hang out with Jesus all this time. They're learning to do the things Jesus does. They're learning to be like him. And then things don't go well with the Samaritans, which is this whole other group of people that we can talk about later. And he's like, hey, you want me to call fire down on them? When did you think you had, what? And so they're kind of these crazy guys. Picture your friend who's always willing to do something crazy. So you got, two of them. They tend to be brothers too. You ever have those two brothers who are crazy? Some of you are thinking your brothers, right? Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, and Matthew, which is also Levi. See again, he didn't just make jeans; he was a tax collector. He's a tax collector. Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot. You're the other Simon. And a zealot was someone, they could have been just zealous, but usually they were the people who wanted to overthrow the government. This was the guy who was, talking about conspiracy theories, all kinds of stuff. He's ready to take over. And then Judas Iscariot, who later betrayed him. There's a reason we don't name many people Judas. And really, this is this really eclectic group of people, isn't it? When you look at it, honestly, when you read when you were reading with the cities, you kind of glossed over it, didn't you? Anyone, when they were reading this, just kind of gloss over it? Yeah, Some of you did. You're like, okay. So, you didn't think, oh, who is Simon? Who's this? Who is Bartholomew? Who's Thaddeus? We can kind of skip over there. It's really eclectic group. You've got the guys who were fishermen, right? And then you've got Matthew, a.k.a. Levi, and he is a guy who used to collect taxes from those guys. And remember, those were the guys, they were working for the government. They kind of saw them as traitors. It'd be like if the Nazis took over and that person was working for them. So you've got that guy with the other guys. You've got the zealot who wants to then take over, the government. You've got all these different people, and it's this weird mix. And some of them we don't even know much about. And it's really, it's kind of funny, because Jesus brings together a really significantly weird group of people. And that should be consolation to some of you, because you're pretty weird. No, and the cool thing is, that's how Jesus works. He pulls people together not based on, okay, you were this kind of person, you're that kind of person. Because, on our own, don't we do that? Like outside of church, let's be honest, sometimes you hang out with people who are like you. No? Yeah, okay. Most of us do. You people who like the same things, people, that's why we always say, just unfriend me on Facebook. I just do that whenever someone says, no, kidding. We tend to hang out with people who do the same things we do. We think the same way, most of us, naturally. You may have some friends who are kind of outside that box, but we naturally do. And I always laugh at, Justin and I. Some of you know Justin, he does the announcements sometimes. We are as different as you can imagine. Well, maybe not. But he went to Dover. I was fortunate enough to go to Caesar Run. Justin went to Penn State. I went to Pitt. He likes the Eagles. Honestly, this year I could root for the Eagles. That was a great team, godly people, a lot of integrity. I know someone's going to, make that into a meme because they're so surprised. But, I'm a Pittsburgh fan. Living in Pittsburgh, it just kind of rubs off on you. He uses an Android phone. I use an iPhone. Are we mostly an Android crowd here? But we divide over all these things naturally, right? Justin and I are great friends, though. Why? Because of Jesus. Because that's the thing that unites us. And we naturally tend to divide everything. I'm going to jump ahead to Galatians, where Paul writes this. He says, there is no longer Jew or Gentile, slave or free, male or female, for you are all one in Christ. Now, in the ancient world, Jew and Gentile, big difference. Jewish people were separate from the Gentiles. They weren't even allowed to hang out with the Gentiles. They weren't allowed to go into the house of a Gentile, because you might get Gentile cooties. And so, they were separate. And the Gentiles, they kind of they both had a respect for the Jews and a disdain at times. It was a very complicated relationship. But it's a big difference. Slave or free. That's a big difference. If you're a slave, you had to do the will of your master. If you're free, you don't. And that comes into whole social stratification of the Roman Empire. We had a long discussion over that. But big difference. Male or female. Big difference. Viva la différence. That's a big deal. But those are the things, and it's like a sampling of the things at that time that divide us. And I think as people sometimes we concentrate on things that divide us. And we Facebook everything about that things that divide us. I'll be honest, I like social media. I have not been on Facebook a lot lately because everyone's just angry at everybody else. And it's like, it doesn't matter what the issue is. We're just all completely right, completely left. I just want someone to post some pictures of puppies. I want a little chocolate lab or, Someone post that, please. No, people are doing it right now. My favorite one for Valentine's Day is a box of chocolates. And it's all, yeah. I could post that every year. That's the only thing I get my wife, a meme. But we tend to focus on those things, but really the question is, will your love for me, Jesus, will your love be bigger than anything else? Because he pulls together these people who should fight and argue. And really, I think in the church, it's interesting because, often there's conflict in the church. Anyone ever been in a church with some conflict? Yeah. Basically, I just asked you if you've ever been in a church. Right. I told you about one church. A friend of mine, his grandfather's church, they were like a little community. They split. The church split, but they wouldn't leave. Like, the one side sat on this side of the church, the other side sat on this side, and they had to call local law enforcement in during the annual business meetings. I mean, that's, division. And that happens naturally because the church is full of people who are very different. And that's why we really need to keep our focus and attention on Jesus, because Jesus is the thing that unifies us. Whether we use Android or Apple products, doesn't matter. We're going to use Apple. Actually, our sound booth, it's funny, our sound booth has an Apple computer next to a Windows computer. We just like to show that there's diversity. But what the real common ground in church, the real common ground for is Jesus. And what united the apostles is really so much bigger than what divides. The little arguments and things that they had. I'm sure, I'm kind of reading into the text here, but the fishermen, they're probably paying taxes to Matthew, a.k.a. Levi, all the time, and they're probably pretty frustrated. And so they were probably a little annoyed when Jesus said, "Follow me," and they're like, is this like, when he called them up, they thought, okay, well, now he's going to get reamed out. No, he gets to follow. But those petty things that we have against each other are nothing compared to Christ. And so, really to follow Christ means setting aside all those differences, those things that separate us so that we can truly follow. And it says, he designated some apostles. Now, disciple just means learner, follower, that kind of thing. Apostle means a sent one. I know if you grew up in certain traditions, and there's Apostle Big A, the original apostles. There's, and there's theological debates. I've got books on my shelf you can read if you're into this. It's like debating, are there modern day apostles or not, and all this kind of stuff. But really, he's talking about, he designated some to be these sent ones, these ones that have a job. And I kind of wonder, when you look at the guys, did he pick the right guys? Well, it works out, so you're thinking maybe he did. But it's kind of funny because it's like picking teams for dodgeball. Because if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. There's, when you're choosing for dodgeball, if you've ever been the captain, who do you choose? I start with baseball players. Because they just know how to throw that ball really hard, and you tend to choose the athletic kind of people. You would. And I remember, anyone watch the Goldbergs?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now again, I always feel like whenever I mention a TV show, I have to say I don't know if everything on there's good. Yada yada yada. But there was an episode I thought was funny. Adam finally gets to choose the teams. He's like kind of the geeky kid who doesn't, not too athletic. He finally gets to choose teams, and what does he do? Anyone watch that one? You think he'd pick the guys like him? He picks all the jocks. Because he wanted to be on the winning team. His friends are like, what? But it was funny because you tend to choose people who you think are going to be an asset to the team. Like, chapter 5, Luke, we see, they chose fishermen, and so they chosen some, Peter, James, and John. They choose this tax collector. And Peter is interesting. I love Peter. But I love Peter because he's a screw-up. We think of, Apostle Peter, the great Peter. But, he has a habit of 1 minute saying something really cool, and Jesus is like, hey, you're a rock, and on this rock I'm going to build my church. And then turn around the next minute, and Jesus is like, get behind me, Satan. And the reason I like him is because I screw up a little like that too. And you have your good moments, your bad moments. You feel good when you're next to Peter. And, James and John, trying to call down fire from heaven. And, and then Matthew, a tax collector with an abacus and a pocket protector. It's like this weird, eclectic bunch of people that's a lot like us. And so Jesus is picking these guys to be the ones that are going to carry out the gospel. Now, why did he pick 12? Anyone know? You gotta shout it out, man. 12 tribes of Israel, remember that? Yeah, good. It's a symbolic thing that there were the 12 tribes of Israel, and Moses came down to them, and so, Jesus he goes up on a mountain, he picks these, and it's sort of, it's symbolic of the fact that hey, this is kind of this new thing. I always thought he should choose 10 because it'd be metric, but that's not the way they work. And ultimately, the disciples then were to accompany them. And Jesus is going to send them out to preach. And number one, it's because he needed people to intimately understand what he taught. And I think sometimes, I think we were talking earlier, I love, anyone ever involved in Young Life? I love Young Life. I kind of stumbled upon it. I worked for this guy. I was an intern for a guy, and good guy. I'm not saying anything bad about him. I'm not going to mention his name. But if you're watching this, we're still cool, man. But I remember I worked for this guy, and right before I went to seminary out in California, and it was like, our last night together, we went out to eat and everything, and they're like, I could just never see you in youth ministry, man. And I'm like, awkward. Because I just sold my furniture was so bad I had to give it away. You couldn't even sell our stuff, I had this couch that we called it the hammock couch because it, arched in the middle. It was like sleeping in a hammock. And we were literally about to move from Delaware, Pennsylvania, across the country, which is kind of scary when you're, 22 and all your possessions are packed into a Chevy Beretta. And so we're just like, what? And it kind of threw me for a loop. And the thing is, I love the guy. I worked for him. I ran pyrotechnics. I hit the things shut up and smoke machines and all that. And I used to set up all that stuff for him. And it was like the way he did ministry was very kind of big and exciting. And I think in my heart I knew that wasn't who I was. And so it was a long, awkward drive for 40 hours across the country. Tell me that, send me off, and I'm just like, am I making the biggest mistake of my life? Are we going to die in Los Angeles? I don't know. And I remember really kind of figuring out that, hey, it was just my style was different. And I think my style, and of course everyone thinks their style is more like Jesus, right? But it's that, to invest in people. And that's why I stumbled into Young Life, and we played in clubs and stuff. It was awesome. And it's really, I like to invest in people and disciple them so that they understand who this Jesus is, because then they can live more effectively. And that's what Jesus was doing. He was investing in these people because there was crowds following him. Hundreds and hundreds of people. But Jesus was investing in the few so that they could ultimately change the world. And then, he's training people to do the things that he did. And he's giving them authority to cast out demons. And I know whenever I mention demons, I know there's half the crowd goes, okay, what? These giant things coming out of the floor, and it's like, I don't believe in that. And then the other half of you might be going, that's awesome because demons are everywhere, and you blame everything for demons. there is this demonic world, and I think there's two dangers: either completely ignore them or give them way too much credit. And so we're not going to go all about demons today. That actually sounds like a card game, all about demons. It gives them this authority to cast demons out. And ultimately, I like how John says it in John 17:18. This is after Jesus hung out with his disciples for quite a long time. He says, just as you sent me into the world, I am sending them into the world. And we're supposed to be sent ones. We're supposed to be people who go out. Now, someone asked me out earlier, it was funny, that you were like, okay, what's the deal with the name Deep Water? Anybody remember? I've told the story 5 times, so you know. but it's a strange name for a church. Maybe not today, because we name churches like crazy things all the time now. But if you're in a certain period of time and they named a church, it was the first whatever of this, and there's all these different, and you can tell just from the name of a church sometimes when it was founded, and what their denominational affiliation is. I play that game in my head all the time. Some of you are probably thinking that's weird, but hey, I am weird. But we chose because Jesus said in Luke. That's why we've been in Luke so long. In Luke 5:4, Jesus said, "Go out into deep water." It's the 1984 NIV translation, if you're interested. And so, I really, I'm geeky like that. And so he goes out, and so he sends the disciples out into deep water. They catch a bunch of fish, and then they end up following him. And so for us, it's been the name is symbolic of reminding ourselves that, hey, we're always supposed to be going out into deep water. We're always supposed to be going out where people are. And church becomes, for a lot of people, this thing they go to. I go to church on Sunday, I did church, and now I will not think about Jesus for the rest of the week. I was watching this video, the guy was arguing that Christians ought to believe their silly stuff on Sunday and then forget about it the rest of the week. And I'm thinking, no, that's completely opposite. But, and we grew up, we had this, remember, here's the church, steeple, open up, see all the people. Lies, pack of lies. This is not the church. This is the church building. I will awkwardly construct text to you to tell you where to meet me because I will never say, and if I do, I owe you coffee. If I ever say, meet me at the church, I will say, meet me at the church building, meet me at the gathering place, meet me at the place where we worship on Sundays. And people ask me all the time, where's your church? And I'm like, well, most of them are at work right now. I think some of them are on shift work, so they're like looking at me like I'm weird. And I'm like, no, you asked where the people were, right? And they're like, no, where did you meet? And I'm like, oh, we meet over here behind Whit Brothers. I still call it Whit Brothers anyway. Oh, yeah. I'll get better at it. But that's that thing we need to remember that we're called to be this church. We're called to go out into the world and to do the things Jesus does. And Christianity, this faith is following Jesus. One, it is about right belief. And we spend a lot of time teaching the words of Jesus. We spend a lot of time trying to learn to understand that. But this right belief should then lead to right action. You're not made right with God by what you do. You're made right solely by faith. It's solely by grace. But if I have true faith in Christ, it affects how I live. I'll live differently because I follow Jesus. And the verse I like about this, I like James. James says this in chapter 2. Says, "What good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? Suppose you see a brother or sister has no food or clothing and you say, goodbye, have a good day, stay warm and eat well, but you don't give that person any food or clothing. What good does that do?" That's rhetorical. None. So you see, faith by itself isn't enough. Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith, others have good deeds. When I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I will show you my faith by my good deeds. Now, I read a lot of theology. I like theology. Some of you have seen my pictures of books and everything. When you go to my office, you see all the books, and if you're impressed, I go, and you go, oh, did you read all these? I'll say some of them twice. Because some of them none. But sometimes they're just books you acquire and you mean to read. You never have enough time to read. I kind of wish I could read 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for a year, and so I can catch up on the reading I want to do. But I love theology, but it's interesting because whenever you get into theologians, they're like, oh, this contradicts what Paul is saying, and about it being like by faith alone. And it's really not. James is saying, hey, if you have real faith, it's going to change the way you live. If you really believe in this Jesus, and you come to this thing we call church, and we gather together and we worship, if you really put your faith and trust in Jesus, it changes the way you live. It changes the way you think about things. Now, you're going to be a little screwed up at first sometimes. It takes a while to grow in that, but we should live differently because of this. Information plus application equals transformation. And we'll be changed when we actually put things into process. I love that commercial. It's like Washington crossing the Delaware Turnpike. Is that funny? You find it annoying? I think it's hilarious. And you can see that. And if you're from Delaware, you can see the sign. You're like, yeah, I've been there. And I find that hilarious, and I laugh out loud every time I see it. Now, probably if I see it enough times, it'll annoy me. I just don't watch TV that much because I'm godly and spend most of my time praying. But I love it because it's surprising. It's not what you're expecting. But here's the thing. It makes me think about this whole thing. I believe in George Washington. Anyone believe in George Washington? He existed. Have you ever thought you need wooden teeth? Have you ever chopped down a cherry tree or attacked the British after crossing the Delaware Turnpike? No, because it's not really like believing in George Washington is not life changing. Believing in Jesus should be life changing. I want to do the things that Jesus did, and that's what He calls us to do. It's to be like Him, to do the things that He's called us to do. And faith in Christ will move you to engage the world. You really can't separate faith from action. We try to. It's like peanut butter and jelly. They just go together.
I love peanut butter and jelly.
It's like scrapple and eggs. Pizza and cheese. If you have ordered pizza without cheese, that's just bread with sauce. It's like syrup and pancakes. It's just wrong. I hate when you cook pancakes and then you realize you don't have any syrup. You're like, oh, why did I go through this? Anyone else have that pain? Okay. My son's raising his hand because I've made a big stack of pancakes and then we couldn't find syrup. We're like, oh. Fortunately, we live next to my parents. We just run over and get theirs. They're like, man, I thought we had syrup. It's over here with the rest, half your tools too. But separating faith from Christ it's like telling faith from action. It's like telling a fish they can't have water. It's like telling a lion not to hunt. It's like telling a Labrador not to fetch. I mean, it should be a natural extension. If you have faith, you act differently. You live differently. And ultimately, it's to change the world. And I know this is one part where I think preachers tend to overshoot. Like you need to change the world. Some of you, changing the world is going to be a small thing. We're not all going to go out and lead multi-billion-dollar corporations tomorrow because of an inspiring sermon that we heard today. But your life will change. And you'll do things. And I think a lot of times I think of moms. I love the fact we have moms who are very real on Facebook versus Pinteresty on Facebook. Is Pinteresty a word? But it's I occasionally go on Pinterest, but it's like you go on Pinterest and everything looks perfect and nice and every mom is doing crafts and baking cookies with their children, and it just makes you feel really horrible about yourself because your life doesn't look that way. I like the fact that we have some moms who are honest. This was a bad day. Everyone was vomiting and we were unhappy. Not your mom. You're like, but because parenting is hard. And honestly, I think investing in little kids is challenging, but it can change the world. It may not be leading a multinational corporation. It might be just watching your kid and helping them grow. And so when you want to change the world, I think a lot of times we think big. Start small. It's kind of like when you're a kid. When you're a kid, I remember I grew up, we had the Kent Swim Club. Now it's like the Y outdoor pool. Anyone know where that? Yeah, anyway. I remember I still remember when I was little, I had to go in the little baby pool, which is, half urine, half water, and, you're all like...
It's nice and warm, though.
It is warm, because it's shallow. But, it's like you're stuck in the kiddie pool when you're little, right? But eventually, you grow and you get out of that. And so sometimes you're going to have little things that you're doing now, but you'll grow into some bigger things. And God, I think God calls us all to do things that are going to change the world. They're going to change people's lives around us. And here's the thing. You're not chosen by God because you're so awesomely gifted. He chose a pretty ragtag, weird group of people to change the world. You weren't chosen because you're gifted. It's not because of your gifts, but it's because of His grace. Grace sort of puts us around the table. It's not, and I'm not talking about saying grace, but grace brings us in so that we can be a part of these things. Now, he'll give you some grace gifts, which is, something we'll talk about today, actually, after church, the meeting, gathering, worship thing, the church meeting. I don't even know what to call it. The worship gathering, but Jesus invests, in the 12 so they can change the world. And if you're a follower of Jesus, then you get to invest in people. And today we're going to talk about, we have Church 101, 201, 301, 401. We're doing a membership class. Some of you may know, we just kind of moved into this building recently. Anyone like the building? Yeah. We want to buy the building, which is, stage 2. And we have to do some legal things, and we have to have enough members to do that. So we're kind of doing these membership classes, so you can be a charter member. You get a t-shirt, I don't know, a special card. No, you don't. but we're going through it. In 301 today, we're going to talk about 1 Corinthians 12. It says this: there are different kinds of spiritual gifts, but the same Spirit is source them all. There are different kinds of service, but we serve the same Lord. God works in different ways, but it's the same God who does the work in all of us. A spiritual gift is given to each of us so we can help each other. And so we all have, sometimes we have natural talents and abilities that God will use, but God will gift you and enable you to do the things He's called you to do. I always say, if God wants you to cut down a tree, He's going to give you a chainsaw. If it's a steel, because I like steel. If God wants you to do something, He's going to give you the gifts, the abilities, and talents to do it. Now, sometimes that involves us putting work into it. Sometimes we have to learn, develop. I think one of the things, we're going to talk about it today. Sorry, I'm going to steal your thunder. We're talking about gifts, and, one of the big things is, I think teaching. People think that, they take a spiritual gifts test. There's this test you kind of figure out, the gift of teaching. Well, you have to have the gift of studying so you can, fully use that gift of teaching. you have to put some work into it. But if God wants you to teach, God will give you a gift, and He'll give you this desire to learn and study. You have to turn off Netflix once in a while, so you can do that. but He'll give you the abilities to do the things that He wants you to do. And I think sometimes, you think about the early church. 12 guys without cars or the internet spread the good news all over the world. We have cars and the internet. Now, you could think distraction, but I think, man, if they got those tools, if they got those tools, imagine what they can do. Imagine what we can do. And if you're a follower of Jesus, God put people in your everyday life so you have the opportunity to live out that faith. For some of you, it's going to be the family of the home. And the home. It's, you're going to be a witness where you live. And for some of you, at Deep Water, there's a place, this is not a recruitment drive, but we need things. We need people to volunteer to do some things. Most of you know I'm terrible at some things. I don't mind admitting that. Some of you pick up the slack for me. Thank you. But it's not my intention to do a volunteer drive or guilt you into signing up for stuff. But God wants us to do something with our faith. I think He wants us to serve in our homes. He wants us to serve in a church. And I think, and here's again, I talk about this word sometimes. You'll probably get annoyed at some point because I talk about it so much. But I love the word engage. Yeah, it's a church thing, modern church. We tend to choose a couple words to try to explain to people what we want them to take home. So we use the words what? Gather, grow, engage. Gather, we think this whole community thing is important. Grow, we think you should grow in your faith. And this other word, engage, we chose that over service. Which, I think a lot of, or serve. And the reason we did that is because we don't want you to think serve means you just have to do a job in the church. Because, a lot of times we develop whole programs for people to do cool things here. That's awesome. And we need people here to serve. But we want you to engage the world outside of here. You might go through a process of figuring out your gifts, your talents, and things you're excited about. And maybe the best place for you is to volunteer at the Little League. And be Jesus there. That's going to look a little different than if than some jobs here. But we want you to teach soccer. We want you to coach soccer. We want you to be in Cub Scouts and be the Cub Scout leader. We want you to be Boy Scout leaders. And sometimes I come in a little tired, and that's because we were off camping with the Boy Scouts. That's good stuff. But then we want you to feed the hungry people in Dover. You should be involved and do the things. And really, there's the home, the church, and the world. You're really needed in all three places. And God gave the apostles authority so he could prepare them to lead and to change the world. And we're the result of that. Think about it sometime. You ever think, thousands of years ago, Jesus hung out with 12 questionable dudes, and now we have this worldwide thing, this whole Christianity thing. It's a big deal. It's worldwide. We've got outlets in nearly every country. We get to be a part of that. And as part of the church, God is preparing you to lead, to serve, and to share his message with someone. Now, as the band comes back to play, we're going to go.